I'm Andy Agapangelo. I'm the founder of the Transparency Task Force. I started the Transparency Task Force in 2015, having become very, very concerned about the level of opacity and lack of integrity in the financial sector. The Transparency Task Force is a certified social enterprise. We have a formal mission, which is to promote ongoing reform of the financial sector so that it serves society better. It would be fair to say that we are becoming increasingly concerned about the lack of effective regulation in this space. I say that because a very high proportion of our members are people who have become scam victims of one kind or another. And very sad to tell you that some of them have lost a significant amount of money. And many of those people who have lost a significant amount of money have lost money because of some kind of regulatory failure. I'm going to share some very sad news with you in a moment. I don't want to shock you when I do, so please brace yourself for some very sad news. And I'm just going to, before I do share that sad news, I'm going to remind everybody that we are recording this event. Only say what you want to say on record. Clearly don't say anything that you cannot prove or back up, because there may be folks out there who want to challenge what you say in one way or another. You're welcome to use the chat to make comments, ask questions, share contact details, however you wish. We will also be circulating the chat. I'm now going to be sharing my screen to show you something that I think is very, very important to explain. So here we go. The Transparency Task Force, as I mentioned earlier, operates as a not-for-profit. Much of the work that's done within our community is done by volunteers. And we were very, very proud to know Ian Davis, a really nice guy. I'm not just saying that because of what happened to him, but a really nice guy. Could I please invite you all to take a moment to read the words on your screen that I'm about to highlight? You should be able to see them. I'm not going to rush you when you're doing that because I want you to read those words and absorb what they are saying, because they are directly relevant to what we are discussing this evening, in my opinion. And for those of you that knew Ian, and frankly, for those of you that didn't, please spare a thought for him, his family and friends. So I went up to Ian's funeral up in Scotland. Such a loved man, such a nice bloke. He lost over £600,000 through a scam, the LC&F scandal. If you don't know about the LC&F scandal, this is one of them that you could so definitively describe as a catastrophic regulatory failure. If you want to know more about why it was a catastrophic regulatory failure, you can read about it in a report, a very good report by Dame Elizabeth Gloucester, who talked about the extensive failures that led to the LC&F scandal. It's my personal belief, and we did know Ian quite well, it's my personal belief that Ian didn't hang himself because he lost the money or because he was scammed. It's my personal belief that he hanged himself because he spent 3 years going round and round in circles, trying to get the authorities to support him and listen to what you were saying about the crooks and the fraudsters and the failure on all fronts, frankly. So a really sad thought. And I'm sharing this information with you all for several reasons. I'm aware that some of you have lost a considerable amount of money. And there's a chance that some of you may be having some very dark thoughts. This document here, Faces of Financial Crime, Suffering Caused by the Financial Sector, is a document the Transparency Task Force published in Parliament last year. We launched it in Parliament. It's 22 case studies of individuals who were scam victims. And speaking frankly with you, I am frequently worried about some of those individuals, about how they are struggling to cope with what's happened to them. So for me personally, what we're talking about tonight is kind of breaking my heart, because most of you are victims and have lost a lot of money. And we're having meeting after meeting after meeting with people who have in some way found themselves a victim of skullduggery of one kind or another, and frequently, not always, and frequently victims of a catastrophic regulatory failure of one kind or another. So this is serious stuff. We're going to be having some pretty adult, open conversations with each other. My overall objective tonight is to explore the idea that we can try to create a sense of unity amongst you all. It's my perception, and it may not be a reality, but it's my perception that those of you impacted by High Street Group, Castle Trust and related entities are a very fragmented bunch of people, a very fragmented group of people, sometimes pulling in different directions, sometimes concerned about conflicts of interest of people around them. And that's not healthy if you want to get redress, because getting redress is very simply about trying to articulate a clear, consistent, compelling message about what happened, about what's going on now, and what needs to happen in the future. And speaking frankly about it, if you're all pulling in different directions, and if there are little tribes doing this and tribes doing that, you're never going to get the unity that's going to be necessary to campaign for justice, compensation, redress, reform, and all those sorts of things. So following a few conversations I had a month or two ago, I thought maybe TTF can do something here to try to bring all these disparate people, all these different tribes together to talk about the situation, behave like grown-ups, talk like grown-ups, have honest conversations about what's going on and what you're concerned about, and see where we go from here. If we can do something healthy to kind of get the issues out in the open and talk about them, then from my point of view, that will be something that's well worth trying to do. I'm very, very aware that many of you have been impacted quite badly by this, and it doesn't surprise me that that's the case. I'm going to share my screen again, if I may, just to share with you some of the comments that people have put into the booking process. I'm not going to read these out, but just please take a moment to look on the screen and read what some of you have commented when you book your places. I've got about 3 slides of this stuff, so these points are what are front of mind for you all. I personally think the whole thing's pretty damn tragic. The question here in the second one about, what can we do to stop it from happening again? Our next speaker, Mark Bishop, is somebody who many people within the Transparency Task Force, including myself, know, like, respect, trust. Mark will talk about his own experience going back to something like 8, 9, 10 years or something crazy like that. Frankly, we're all getting fed up with the routine occurrence and reoccurrence of scams and scandals like this. To my mind, this consistently points towards a failure of effective regulation and oversight. And one of the other things that comes up time after time after time is the lack of energy going into chasing down the people responsible. getting prosecutions and carrying out investigations. You see, even if an investigation fails, the very fact that there was one has a deterrent effect. It's so important to be seen to be going for the people who caused the problem. So important. Yet what we want to see happening clearly isn't happening as much as it should. That's probably enough from me. I'll just cover the key points, folks. Let's have an adult conversation amongst ourselves. Please listen to what the speakers are saying. Use the chat to raise comments, questions. We'll circulate the chat, we'll circulate the video. Let's try to find a way of creating a sense of unity about what happens next. We've called this event High Street Group and Castle Trust. What should happen next? You may all have very different opinions about that. If that remains the case, it's very likely that nothing meaningful is going to happen next because everyone's pulling in different directions. But if there's one or two or three things where there's a real sense of consensus, things we can agree on, things you can all get behind, then that creates the possibility of beginning to operate like an effective campaign group. From what I've seen so far, speaking very bluntly with you, that doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. Okay, thank you all for being here. Thank you for taking time to explore the possibility that we might be able to find a way of getting some unity and some consensus. And can I please invite you to listen very attentively to Mark Bishop, who's going to be speaking now. Mark's got several lifetimes worth of experience in this sort of space. And I really do encourage you to listen actively to every word Mark says. Mark Bishop, over to you, sir. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy. So I'm going to do this a little bit differently than I would really treat most of these symposiums for a reason which I hope will soon become clear to you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction about me and what happened to me, and really hopefully that will explain why I'm in this symposium speaking with you now. And then I'm going to raise really a series of questions with you, which I would be grateful if those of you on this call who are High Street Group victims, and only those who are High Street Group victims, I'm not interested for the moment in having a conversation with anybody who isn't, or about any other cases. So I would be interested in having the views of you guys to talk about where you are in terms of your investigation and your campaign. So in 2009, I think it was, to 2010, I invested in a collective investment scheme called the Connaught Income Fund Series 1. This product was operated and promoted by the financial services division of one of our biggest companies, Capita. And it was available only through independent financial advisors. This wasn't what's known as a boiler room scam, where there is a product entirely outside of the regulatory perimeter that is being punted by a load of wide boys in a serviced office somewhere, picking up the phone to people and trying to sell them, you know, some carbon credits or something like that. Wasn't one of those, not at all, quite the reverse. And the product was called the Connaught Income Fund Series 1, and it made a number of claims which were essentially that the product was low risk, it was guaranteed, and it was compared to by taking out, for example, a deposit account with a high street bank or building society, or investing in government bonds. So that's what I did. And in early 2012, I, along with the other investors in the scheme, found out that there was supposedly a small accounting problem. And for this reason, a quarterly income distribution was not going to be paid. 3 months later, we found...
Mark, you seem to have frozen. I'm wondering if you have. We may have a connection problem with Mark. Mark will leave and come back again, and we'll pick up with Mark in a moment when he returns. Okay. What I'm going to do now is go straight to Tamara, So Tamara, can you please introduce yourself, explain your involvement with this sorry affair, and we'll go back to Mark after Tamara has spoken. Thank you, Tamara. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Tamara Kotelek-Nowicka. I'm hopefully familiar to the group of 51 here today. I have approached Transparency Task Force through a series of conversation prior to this event. My sort of objective was to come closer to an understanding. We have, as a group, approximately, give or take, 16 months until the administration of the High Street Group will deem to be dissolved, and in absence of any providence of facts that may or may not be investigated, criminally speaking, the group of 1,500 people effectively has no factual basis on which a fraud can be proved. Facts that are needed, in fact, to run campaigns, to speak to respective political bodies and financial institutions in the UK, but also more pragmatically speaking, looking for a of redemption on basis of a push fraud, for example, which is a quite possible way of a redemption through the FOSS way. So I have asked Andy if he would be able to facilitate this conversation to see if there's means that we can separately or collectively use the information that the administration up to date provides to get to kick off the process effectively with the FOSS about the redemption of any remunerations. I know there's varied interest groups in this group. I think it could span in many ways, but the overall, the facts are 16 months to the end of the closure, which we can still influence in our benefit, possibly. It's just a ways of pragmatically reaching hopefully the same goal. Thank you.
Tamara, thank you very, very much indeed. I think Mark is still disconnected. Perhaps his broadband has gone at home or something like that. We're going to go straight from Tamara to Andy Holland. Andy's very kindly prepared a pretty detailed synopsis of the issues as he sees them. So, Andy Holland, over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. Just mind if I just share my screen? I'll just explain who I am. I'm a consultant who works on behalf of a few different legal entities who specialise in negligence claims against in the financial sector, but in the most part. So I've been approached by Andy and Tamara to kind of put something together, do a bit of research, and find out exactly what's going on within the High Street Group and what kind of proposals we can put forward. So as far as they can see it, 1 second, this isn't working. So the objectives that I've been asked to review is to discuss some of the concerns that have been raised regarding the High Street Group and how they operated. We've provided an overview of the administration process and where it's up to date, and establish whether it would be prudent to overturn the administration and the costs associated with doing so, and then explain the types of potential compensation claims available to the victims. So I'd like to say at this point, as much as I've tried to confirm all the information that I'm going to provide, I've been given this quite a lot of work, just over the past 4 days. So there may be information that I'm providing that may not be 100% correct, but I have done my best to verify the facts that I'm providing to you here. So I'd just like to confirm that before we proceed. If we look at Hadrian's Tower, one of the developments by the High Street Group. So they were purchased by one of High Street Group's companies, Olympias Developments, on the 27th of July for around £2.5 million. Tolland Construction were then contracted to complete this construction. And according to the administration documents of Olympias Development, they owed Tollent Construction £2.1 million, and High Street Group, the main firm, owed them a further £1.7 million. Tollent Construction has now entered administration, and the property now appears to be managed by the One Collection. And then we'll move on to Middlewood Plaza, which was purchased by another of High Street Group's companies, Rhodes Developments, on the 16th of July 2018 for around £1.4 million. It appears that the development of this project was funded by a company called Topland Jupiter. And the administrators have confirmed that Rhodes Development owed Topland Jupiter £7 million when they went into administration. Move on to Kent Street Baths, which is, I believe, still under construction, although I'm not 100% sure of that fact. And it looks like the property was purchased by another of High Street Group's companies, Palmas Developments, and it looks like Looper Land and KSB Birmingham Limited were responsible for arranging the construction. Noble Construction were contracted to carry out the construction work, as far as I can see, and Looper Land and KSB Birmingham look like they owed Noble Construction around £6 million when both of those firms entered administration. Noble Construction is now in administration as well. Palmas Developments has now been transferred over to Hadrian Real Estate and is now part of their group of companies. So I've had a look at the administration process. So Insolve Plus are the current administrators of the High Street Group company. So that's High Street GRP Limited. The reports, they don't appear to show much progress with the administration, but that is said, administration processes can be very lengthy. So I've reached out to an insolvency practitioner that I've worked with in the past, and he said that although this might be the case, he would have expected to see more progress, but he wouldn't like to say anything further than that at this point, because, like I said, it is a large company and these things do take time, unfortunately. The administrators have been in contact with Hadrian Real Estate. Their reports state that there's an indemnity that confirms that the investors will be repaid by Hadrian Real Estate if the projects are successful. And they also say that they've reviewed the business plan of the company and they are happy with the contents of that. But I think it would be in the best interest of the creditors to get a copy of these documents. So that's something that I think we should strive to achieve if that has not already been done. As far as I'm aware, it's not, but correct me if I'm wrong. Also, they've confirmed that there are 12,300 transactions that merit further investigation. 2,300 of these are over the value of £50,000, and the total value of this 2,300 transactions is £314 million. So each transaction has an average value of around 141,000. There are 4,700 intercompany withdrawals, and that totals £96 million, so an average value of around 20,000. And then there are 2,300 intercompany receipts of a total value of £72 million, with an average value of 31,000. And there are other payments within the bank account that they're not clearly labelled, and so they are investigating these transactions further. There are pre-administration costs of over £245,000, and they will be the first things to be paid if any funds are recovered from the administration process. So just a bit about Hadrian Real Estate, because I know that there's a few questions surrounding what happened there. So as far as I can see, and again, this may not be 100% correct, it's as much information as I can find from what is in the public domain. 13 companies have been transferred to Hadrian Real Estate. The latest accounts filed were in 2020, and they were for a dormant company, and that showed that the company had £50,000 worth of assets at that time. The latest accounts were due on the 30th of September 2022, but these haven't been filed yet. The reason for that, I don't know. And as I said previously, there is an indemnity to pay the creditors of the High Street Group. Again, I've not seen a copy of this, and I don't know what that indemnity looks like, so I couldn't provide comments on that. So I've also been asked to discuss Castle Trust and Management Services and the potential for claims against them as your security trustee as the loan note holders. So Castle Trust role was to act on your behalf and offer security on the loans that you have provided to the High Street Group. I've been told that they have professional indemnity insurance, but this is unlikely to be sufficient for the amount of investment within the High Street Group. But again, I've not been able to verify this information. I've not seen the document, so I couldn't say 100%. I'm also aware that there is a separate claim against Castle Trust. Depending on how the contract is structured, this may deplete some of the funds if there would have been any available for a claim against those. I'd also like to say that for a claim against Castle Trust to be successful, it would also have to be argued and proven that Castle Trust failed in their obligations to you as your security trustee. So we don't know what went on in the background, and it would be very hard for us to say without full sight of the documents. But in addition to that, as Castle Trust is now in administration, the insurance policy may have lapsed. The professional indemnity insurance is normally provided on what you call a claims made basis. So that means that the insurance company will only indemnify when they have been notified of a potential claim while the contract is active. Sorry. So that means that when if the insurance has lapsed and does not exist anymore, then if they've not been notified of any claims, then they can turn around and not offer indemnity to the investors. Again, I'm not sure if they have been notified or anything like that. So that remains to be seen. So I've also been asked what the process would be to overturn the current administrators if that's what the creditors wanted. For that to happen, you'd need 25% of the value of creditors to call a vote. Within that vote, 50% of the creditors would have to vote in favour of new administrators being appointed. There's a few potential issues with this. So the current administrators' fees would take priority. Potentially an agreement could be made between the existing administrators and the proposed new administrators to split the fees that are available, the funds, sorry, to pay the fees that would be available. If that agreement could not be reached, then funds could be put on account to pay for the investigation, and these would be returned if any recoveries would be made. Those funds would have to be put up by you guys, the creditors of the company. The creditors will also have to fund the creditors meeting. So the cost of this meeting is at the current administrator's discretion, and the cost will be incurred regardless of whether the vote is successful or not. So yeah, there's a risk there. So in addition to that, the administrators may not call a meeting to replace them if they don't think that the creditors have sufficient grounds to do so. So the creditors must put forward a good enough argument, and that's likely to be based on the lack of progress. But like I said, that may not be successful under the fact that these administration processes do take time. So if they did stop the vote from happening, then an application to court can be made in that instance. So the cost of appointing a new administrator, it's likely to cost at least £10,000 to convene a meeting, and that's due to the fact that there are a large amount of creditors of the High Street Group. If an application to court was required, there would be legal costs attached for this solicitor's time and the court fees. So that would have to be raised again by yourselves. And if no agreement can be made between the current administrators to share the fees, then around this is an estimate, around £25,000 would be required to be put on account to cover the cost of these investigations. So it's not a cheap thing to do, this whole process, but that would be down to you as the creditors to decide whether you think it would be the best way to move forward. I've also been asked to look at the potential compensation claims available. So I see there being three categories of these. So the claims for advice that was provided to the investors. So if you received financial advice from somebody, there could be a potential claim there. I'll go into a bit more detail about these in a second. So claims for due diligence failings of a pension provider or an ISA manager. So if you invested through a pension or through an ISA, you could potentially claim for lack of due diligence of the provider of those services. But again, we'd have to prove that due diligence did not take place, or that due diligence was not sufficient. And also, there's also the authorised push payment fraud claims, which Tamara mentioned earlier. So the negligent financial advice claims, that would be made against a regulated independent financial advisor, or their firm, I should say. The advisor must be FCA regulated in most cases. There are potential for claims against firms who are regulated in other jurisdictions, and there could be legal claims against non-regulated people, but that's not something that I'm well versed in, so I wouldn't like to provide any information on that. This is likely to be a claim under the regulatory framework, so that is using the Financial Ombudsman Service and the Financial Services Compensation Scheme under the Financial Services and Markets Act and the processes within that statute. So, but the claimants do have the ability to claim through the courts if that's the way that they wanted to go. The regulatory claims can be made directly against the advising firm if they are active and they have the funds or the insurance policy in place to compensate. If those claims were unsuccessful, then the Financial Ombudsman Service will act as a mediator, and they will provide an independent view on your case if that's the route that you wanted to go down. And if the advisor can't pay compensation themselves, if they don't have the funds available, they don't have insurance, they're no longer trading, they might be dissolved, then an application can be made to the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, but there's limits attached to both of these services. So the due diligence failing claims. So if somebody invested through a self-invested personal pension, you can make a claim against the SIPP provider. There could also be a claim if an investment was made through an ISA, like I said, against the ISA management. But this option isn't available for people that invested through a SAS, other occupational schemes, or pure ops pensions, as far as I'm aware. I think you could potentially make, again, if a pure ops is regulated in a different jurisdiction, you could potentially make a claim down there. But again, that's something that I'm not particularly well versed in, so I wouldn't like to provide advice. So there's potential for claims against firms that are regulated in other jurisdictions. Sorry, as I was just saying them. So again, it's likely to be a claim under the regulatory framework, under FSMA, but you can take that through the courts. And the regulatory claims directly against the provider, same process as the claims against financial advisors. Then it will go to the Financial Ombudsman Service, and if they were not able to pay compensation, an application can be made to the FSCS. So the authorised push payment fraud cases, and as I understand it, these are where they have particular interest to you guys. So there are three categories that these fit into. So there's the payments made before the 28th of May 2019, and or the bank is not a signatory to the contingent reimbursement model code. So that's the CRM code that was released by the LSB, and that was released on the 28th of May. A lot of high street banks, the majority of high street banks, are a signatory. There's payments that are made after the CRM code was released, and then there's also transfers from non-UK banks. So for the payments made pre-CRM code, and for those who bank with people that are not signatories of the code, we'd have to satisfy the following criteria. So the investment was a scam. The bank did not intervene when you were making the payment, and the payment was unusual activity. So that basically means that it's not in line with the current way that you run your account. So if you're sending £10,000-20,000 between different accounts regularly, there's no requirement for the bank to flag that up. But if you use your account for shopping on a regular basis, and then you suddenly send £50,000 to a different company, then the bank the bank probably should have intervened at that point and asked if you knew what you were doing, and explain the risks of such transaction to you. Then we have to prove that the bank intervention would have uncovered a scam. That last point is unlikely to proceed in this instance because if you look at High Street Group at face value, it's unclear whether it would have been a scam, and also I can't say 100% at this moment in time that it was a scam. That's that more information has to be collated and everything like that before I can draw that conclusion, and that we'd have to prove that to the Ombudsman, which I'll go into in a bit more information later on. So I'm currently speaking with the Financial Ombudsman Service, and I believe that it should be the case that the bank should be held responsible if the individual is a retail client. So that's somebody that earns under £100,000 a year and or has less than £250,000 of assets outside their family home and pension, and therefore they shouldn't be investing in restricted products. So that's a bond or a loan note. There's other examples, but they're obviously what we're interested in now. The individual was provided with advice again in breach of the general prohibition as well, should also be a factor in my eyes, and that's somebody that's being provided advice by somebody that is not regulated to do so, so not an FCA regulated firm. And I believe that an employee of a bank should reasonably be held to know that the FCA's rules on these matters and could provide the customer with adequate information on this. So they can't provide advice, but they could warn you of these things and advise on the FCA's rules in regards to these matters. Where the payment was made after the CRM code was introduced, there's only two things that we'd have to prove. So it's that the investment was a scam and the bank did not intervene when making the payment. So that's a much simpler thing to prove. But again, the big sticking point is whether the High Street Group was a scam, and whether we can provide evidence to prove that fact. There's also transfers from non-UK banks, which makes things a lot more difficult. So there could potentially be a claim against the recipient bank. It would have to be proven that the recipient bank was negligent, and that they owed the sender a duty of care. That's something that could be looked into if there are enough people that were in this position and wanted to move forward with it. But these claims would be very difficult to prove. The prospects of success are much lower than the other two categories. So to prove that investment was a scam. So according to the Cambridge Dictionary, a scam is defined as an illegal plan of making money, especially one that involves tricking people. And then fraud is defined as the crime of getting money by deceiving people. So the key term here is deception. So you have to prove that you were deceived into transferring that money and it was used for other purposes other than what it was intended. For these sorts of claims to be successful, the burden of proof is the civil standard. So we have to prove it on the balance of probabilities. So it is probably a scam rather than the criminal standard, which is beyond reasonable doubt. So we do not need a successful conviction by the police against any of the directors or the company. We don't need them to find that fraud actually occurred. We can prove it on a civil burden of proof. So the evidence would have to be provided that an individual was deceived into transferring funds from their bank for the purposes of an investment opportunity when such investment opportunity did not exist. So the best way to do that, in my opinion, two cases that I've dealt with in the past, is by showing that the funds were not used for their intended purposes. So in this instance, they were not used to purchase and develop products, which is what the High Street Group were supposedly doing, and that's how they marketed, use it under their investment memorandum and their sales documents. So in instances like this, I've had an agreement with the Financial Ombudsman Service where we would submit around 5 test cases, and then they will provide their view on whether they are likely to succeed with the evidence that we've managed to collate. And that's something that we do in instances like this. So proposals to move this forward. I think the best thing to do would be to categorise each client to establish the most prudent compensation route. We need to establish whether investors are interested in replacing the current administrators and whether that would be the best way forward for this. Again, you'll all have your own opinions on that, and I'm not going to comment. I've just been asked to provide the information. I think we should request that the administrators provide the investors with a copy of the indemnity from Hadrian Real Estate in respect of the individuals that have invested in the High Street Group. So to establish exactly what that indemnity looks like and what potential returns you could see from this company. And I think it would also be good to see the business plan for the company to see exactly what's going on and what the chances of success of funds being returned. So for ease of administration, if we did want to go down this route, I've created a form where we can categorize these clients. And if you scan the QR code that's on the bottom corner of the screen, there's a link to that form. I'll also put a copy of that form in the chat. I'll do that once I finish speaking. So then, and if you want to contact me for any further information or anything like that, I've set up an email address just for the sake of this, hsg@andy-holland.com, or you can scan the QR code and that will that'll provide you with my details and along with the form that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, that's everything that I've got to say from the research that I've done over the past few days. But yes, over to you, Andy.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. Folks, Andy's put quite a bit of, well, more than quite a bit, a great deal of time and effort into preparing the session to enable him to provide his overview as he's just done. So can I please invite you all to put your hands together to thank Andy for the preparation and the delivery of this session just now. Thank you very much indeed, Andy. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you very much, Andy. Well done. We're now going to see whether we can have Mark Bishop up and running again. So, Mark, I can see you back in the room. Can you take over from here? If you start speaking, hopefully everybody will be able to hear you. Thank you, Mark. And just before Mark starts, one of the many reasons why Mark's opinions are so rated so highly within the Transparency Task Force is that he really does understand the most kind of pragmatic, cost-effective ways of getting things done that actually can really make a difference. So as I said earlier, please do listen very attentively to what Mark is about to say. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. So I don't know, how far was I into speaking when we got cut off before?
You just started. You may as well start back at the beginning, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to tell you really why I'm on this call, because I'm not an investor in High Street Group. I have not ever invested in it, not considered investing in it. But it does actually very much having parallels with what I was involved in. So in 2012, I found out that a collective investment scheme that I had put £300,000 into, called the Connaught Income Fund Series 1, was essentially a Ponzi style fraud. And having done that, I went onto social media and found some of the other victims, and we investigated it. So in terms of where you guys are, I think you've got a Facebook group. We were in a very similar place. We didn't have Facebook in those days. Facebook in those times was mostly for very young people, and most of the people invest in these things are usually middle-aged or older. I was actually one of the younger people. So we instead created a website, and through that we gathered email addresses and we emailed those people. And we put together a group of people who had complementary skills. So the first thing I'm going to say to you is I don't know whether you have got that, but if you haven't, it's really important to do it. Investigative skills are really crucial. So ours was essentially supposed to be bridging loans made to people buying property. It actually turned out to be development funding to property developers, which is where we have some parallels with what you thought you were investing in. But very much like yours, once we looked at it in detail, we found money going all sorts of places where it shouldn't go. We had a lawyer on our group, which was really useful, and a guy who was running a listed property company who started his working life as a surveyor, so he could look on the land registry and find out about the properties, charges that were on the properties, title, and things like that. We also found that there was regulatory obstructions because we reported our concerns about some of what was going on to the Financial Services Authority, now the Financial Conduct Authority, very early on, and we found that they were unhelpful. We later discovered that there were links between the case officer who was supposedly supervising one of the firms and the perpetrators. This is actually not unique. And we also became streetwise as a result of this. Now, I saw the presentation that's just been given, and the first thing I'll say is a lot of work's gone into it and praise is needed for that. The second thing is, I think that you're barking up the wrong tree, to be honest with you. And as I kind of talk, I'm going to try and explain to you why I think that's the case. And I'm going to maybe also go down the path of asking a few questions. I should say as well that in the time that I've been a financial services campaigner, which is 11 years now, I have helped people who run many other action groups. So, for example, London Capital and Finance, Lendy, Collateral, Funding Secure, I don't know, trying to think of a few more, Blackmore Bond, Woodford, and also ones involving small businesses. So IRHP Redress, RBS GRG, HBOS Reading, those sorts of things. And I've worked with those people, the people who run these action groups, and I've learned things from them. I think you guys are down a blind alley, and I would like to try and lead you out of it. I'm not going to lead your action group. I'm too busy. I don't know enough about your case, but I may be able to help you with some things that will help you to help yourselves. The first thing is Hadrian Real Estate is an extension of the original scam. Do not trust Hadrian Real Estate. How do I know that? Well, in the first 30 seconds of the presentation, it talked about Hadrian Real Estate. I looked up the firm on Companies House. I clicked on the tab named People. I saw the list of people. And I then looked at the same corresponding list of people for High Street GRP Limited, and I saw the same name, Gary Forrest. So I suspect that Gary Forrest is one of the two directors of High Street GRP Limited. He set up the Hadrian Real Estate, and now he has pretended to step back from it, but he's still there on the register for eternity as a former director of it. And I bet you he's picking up consultancy fees and has all sorts of interests in that organization. So any solution that involves Hadrian Real Estate is not going to solve the problem for you. The second thing is you need claims management companies and lawyers who pretend to be claims management companies like you need a hole in the head. They will take a big chunk of the money. And while I cannot speak for the claims management company that you're currently being funneled to, I can tell you that very often claims management companies that are involved in trying to unpick scams that have happened turn out to be connected to the scammers. I genuinely don't know whether that's the case here. It may well not be. But the idea that you guys will have to give up a significant proportion of your address to them is to me a very painful thing. I know that you have concerns about the insolvency practitioners that are in place. I would be very interested to know whether those insolvency practitioners were introduced to the company and appointed by the directors, or whether they have been put in place by a lender or by you guys as the creditors. Now, when I was involved in the Connaught scam, the Connaught Income Fund Series 1 is the name of the fraud that I was a victim to, we saw, I've seen a note from Miss Jewell saying they were chosen by Gary Forrest. Okay, so when an insolvency happens, usually the directors put in place a firm of insolvency practitioners. And within the insolvency industry, which is a very dodgy profession, there are a lot of insolvency practitioners who basically let it be known that they are in the business of not asking difficult questions about the conduct of the directors. And therefore, if you are a director that's done something that you're not proud of, these are the insolvency practitioners to bring in. Now, when we got involved in the Connaught scam, we found that the various firms involved already has involved in them an insolvency practitioner. And we could see that one of the insolvency practitioners was basically a crook. he'd been involved in covering up misconduct in a previous scam and was being investigated by his professional body. We could see that other ones were very dodgy, and other ones from a large firm had been taking large amounts of money from the principals of the scam before appointment. So we held votes to remove all of them. And generally speaking, I would say the first job, the job number one in a situation like this, is to remove the director's choice of insolvency practitioners and replace them with your own. Doesn't matter what it costs. The cost will be paid by the insolvent estate. I'm very concerned that you haven't already done it. I know that some people, I don't know who, involved in this business, from the point of view of the victims, have had conversations with an insolvency firm that I trust, which is Kroll. Kroll used to be known as Duff and Phelps, but it didn't go anywhere. I don't know why it didn't go anywhere. If any of you want to have a conversation with Kroll again, I would be happy to facilitate that. I'm not saying I'm not connected to them in any way. I'm not saying they're the world's best insolvency practitioners. They are certainly expensive, even more expensive than the ones you've got. If your concern is to minimize insolvency costs, definitely don't use them. But frankly, you're unlikely to get back much, if anything, from things as it stands, because Gary Forrest is still running the show and he's going to still take whatever he can out of this. So if you want to fix the situation, clearly you need to remove the insolvency practitioner, you need to get rid of the claims management companies, and what you need is one of you to lead an action group that's going to step up to the plate, because what you've done so far, frankly, it's not working. It's a long way from where you need to be. So that's job number one, being the insolvency practitioners and appoint good ones. Next thing you need to do, I think, is to understand what proportion of the investments are made via independent financial advisors, SIPs or ISAs. Because the one thing that I think is true about the presentation that we've just seen, I mean, obviously other things were true as well, but the thing that is a legitimate form of recovery that would work quite quickly is those of you who invested via those three channels, you make a complaint to the firm, and then you make a complaint to the Financial Ombudsman Service about the firm. The probability is you will get your money back up to the limit of the FSCS, which is £85,000. If you haven't done it, do it already. Don't do it via a claims management company, do it yourselves. Now, if those three channels are a tiny proportion of the amount of money that's been lost, then you are now dependent on the insolvency practitioners to get the rest of it back. But if it's a very high proportion, then frankly, what happens in insolvency doesn't matter. You have an easy route to redress. So I would need to know what percentage of the money was via those three channels. I've also had a very quick look at the second report of the insolvency practitioners, and it's a very unusual feature of the insolvency that most of the names on your creditor committee are firms rather than individuals. I would like to know why that is. Is it because people have been buying up these kind of bonds at a few pence in the pound and are now trying to get their money back? Is it because you guys have signed up to claims management companies and it's the CMCs that are on the creditors committee? I don't know what's going on there, and I'd like to understand it. So really, more than anything else, it sounds like I'm being very negative, because I think you're in a bad situation, and you guys, you need leadership. You need somebody to lead you, and you need that person to know what they're doing. And I'm not confident that that's the case at the moment, and because the basic things that should have been done by now haven't been done. So I apologise if I'm sounding critical. I don't mean that. Don't mean to be critical of any individual. I'm being critical of the situation in which you find yourselves, and I do think that there needs to be a change of approach if you're going to get much money back. So there we are. I'm happy to have a chat with you if anybody knows, why you've got the current insolvency practitioners, why they're trusting Hadrian Real Estate, what conversations have been with other insolvency practitioners, if you want to replace your current ones, how far down the line are you with that? Do you want any help with it? What proportion of investments were made via IFAs, SIPs and ISAs? How much of it was below £85,000? That matters as well, of course, because the ones above 85 grand, they're going to be capped at 85k. Those are the main things. So fire away, anybody. Please tell me what you know.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark, the questions you just referred to, would it be possible for you to put those into the chat in some way? I'm just wondering if we can
Yeah.
kind of come back to them. We're going to go to Ella next, and then we're going to hear from Mike, and then we're going to open it right up. And please, everybody, take a look at the questions that Mark Bishop's about to put into the chat. Mark thinks, and therefore I think, that it's worth thinking about those questions, because the answers to those questions may well help inform what should happen next, which is essentially what this conversation is all about. So Ella, thank you very much indeed, Mark. Can I please also, as we did for Andy, and I should have asked for Tamara, can we please put our hands together to Mark Bishop for sharing many lifetimes worth of experience in the space as well. So thank you very much indeed, Mark. I don't know about you folks, but I would always much rather somebody telling me as it actually is, not giving you needless flannel. Mark's a very direct and straightforward guy, and that's one of the reasons he's a very popular activist within the TTF community. Mark, thank you very much. Let's go to Ella. Ella, please take a while to introduce yourself and share whatever thoughts or concerns you have. Thank you very much, Ella. Thank you.
Hi, are you referring to me?
That's right, yes.
Okay. Well, I'm part of the creditor committee. Unfortunately, I made a huge investment in High Street Group, and from about 2 years ago, I have been involved in all the ups and downs of High Street Group. I think that I've got lots of answers to Mark Bishop. So I can answer your questions, but I don't think that this is the time to answer those. We have been dealing with a very, very difficult situation, and in the sense that in many cases that an investment failure happens, our resort normally is to the administrators. But in terms of High Street Group, we did not actually see any support in any sense as we hoped for. For example, I tell you, I have to go back to what Andy said. I should say that unfortunately, in my whole life, I did not make any risky investment, but I made investment in High Street Group, and I made investment in London Capital Finance almost the same time. If I'd seen the London Capital Finance, I would never have invested in High Street Group. But this happened the same time, and I lost all my savings basically. I am an academic, so I thought that I'm coming to my retirement time. I need extra income, and I felt the trap of these very, very fancy high return investment schemes. Now, in terms of London Capital Finance, I was the initiator of the actions of campaigning. I was fortunate to have contact with the chair of the Treasury Select Committee at the time, who was very helpful. I took all my evidence to her, and she actually ordered this sort of investigation that was done by Dame Elizabeth Gloucester. And I actually saw how that transformed everything in terms of our standing. And I think that this is what we are lacking with High Street Group. Unfortunately, we did not have the support from the administrators in sense of providing the information for us to make it possible to go out and take our case outside. All the time we were expecting to get some information where the money has gone. You cannot go out without having any information. So if I wanted to go, for example, I wanted to go for campaigning, but what could I tell my MP if I don't know, if I don't have any report from the administrators in terms where the money has gone? And the whole time we were promised that this information will come to us and it takes time. I appreciate that, but I should say something. I see the difference between London Capital Finance. We had one of the most expensive insolvency practitioners for London Capital Finance, but it was so effective that within 3 weeks, it told us it's a fraud. We saw transactions, it's fraud. So we had the information in hand to go ahead. Ian Davis, I was all the time in touch with him, the blessed man who lost his life. So I knew all about what he did. We were involved in our investigation, but we had the backing from our administrators and we had information to go in. Unfortunately, in this case, after 18 months, we still do not have the information whether this was fraud, a scam. Still, we are in a struggle to get the basic out. So you see, one of the issues that I see as the barrier has been, it's not the lack of unity of the investors. It's not the case. I see the problem as the lack of valid, reliable information that should have been provided by us, by those who have the authority. And we haven't got that. So we go out and we are one hand on daily basis, we fall to the trap of a claims company. Each of them comes with a fancy offer. Some of the investors trust this one, some of the investors trust the other one. And all the time, we have become the battleground of the claim companies. Whereas we, investors, we have nothing against each other. We all are the victims. So, Mark, in response to what you said, we have had the problem of valid, reliable information, unfortunately. And the reason that we haven't managed to go out and take our case to the media, as we were able to do with the London Capital Finance, was one, we couldn't go to our MPs to tell them what the reality of the case is without the information, one. And second, we could not prove it's fraud, scam. Still, it's 8 months that I'm asking the administrators, please tell us where this 120 million they have borrowed has gone. Why we can't know whether this is fraud or not. And still we get the response that this is something the insolvency services are reviewing. How can this be? I mean, this is just something very odd. So these are the cases I'm trying to, sorry that I went all over the place, but I had to respond to really many, many issues that was raised. And I have to have a personal conversation with you, Mark, to respond why we are where we are actually. And it's not possible for me to do that in the time we have really here. So this is a briefly where we are standing and why we have been struggling so much, because information is the point that you make decision about where to go and how to move forward. We couldn't go to our MP without information. We can't still stop. So this is what I see as our problem.
Ella, thank you very much indeed for setting out your thoughts and your concerns. I think it's right to say it as I see it, that this whole situation does seem a bit of a mess from my point of view. I don't know if anybody else agrees, but it just seems like it's a bit of a mess. And that makes me suspicious as to why it is a bit of a mess, because it shouldn't be. And all the time it remains a mess. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to move forward well. We're now going to go to Mike. Mike's going to keep his camera off. Mike, please spend a few minutes sharing your thoughts about this. And after Mike's spoken, we're going to go to sort of, general Q&A with the intention that we'll be wrapping up at about 7:30 p.m. UK time. Mike, thank you. You might be on mute, Mike. If you are, take yourself off mute, or you might have dropped
You're,
the call.
you're quite right, Andy. I was on mute and I was panicking about how do I take it off.
No worries.
Okay, well, I'm part of an organisation called Safe or Scam. We investigate investment scams. Very occasionally, they turn out not to be scams. We've been running for quite a few years. I've been involved for about 12 years because I was a victim of two scams actually, and that's how I got involved in investigating them. It took me a total of 9 years to finally get justice against one of the scammers because he left the country. He came back in, he left as a single man. He returned 7 years later with a wife and 2 children and was arrested at Heathrow Airport when he landed. And it took 2 years for the trial and he ended up getting 3 years and I ended up receiving about 20% of the investment money back. So I'm very experienced in investigating scams. We first got involved in High Street Group about 3 years ago when an investor came to us, and we were in the process of winding up High Street Group, High Street GRP, and then they just jumped into administration. So that effectively puts a stop to any legal actions that you might take. We have investors who've approached us over the years who've lost from 10,000 to 2 million. Our oldest client is 92 years old. We've been investigated by several police authorities and the FCA, and we've been given a clean bill of health on each occasion. So if you do go to visit our website, you will find there's a pop-up box which you have to click I confirm to be able to go forward. That's an FCA requirement and ensures we're compliant with them. The only real place to look at on our website, I would say, are our blog pages, because we tell it as it is and we're pretty tough on scammers. What I would say is we've established a number of legal actions and we're not looking for High Street Group investors. This is not the reason I'm here today. I spoke to Andy about 5 o'clock this evening and he asked me if I would come on and speak to the investor group, which is why I'm here. So I'm going to be jumping about a bit because I had to make notes at the last minute. And I also had to deal with a High Street Group investor at about 5:20 on the phone. So Andy Holland's done a very good job of describing the state of the administration of High Street Group. What I can say is it's always a very long process to recover money. It doesn't matter whether it's through the administration or through the FOSS or through a legal action, it's going to take years. And we've done quite a few of them. We've had one that was took 3 years and we recovered about 50% of the money for around 100 investors. And that was earlier this year. About two years ago, maybe 2.25 years ago, we took all the paperwork relating to High Street Group to one of the law firms, UK law firms we work with, and a barrister. And effectively, we realised that Castle Trust was probably the best chance investors had of recovering money. To prove fraud against any of the participants in High Street Group is going to be extremely difficult. We've just had a case that has been going for 5 years with the Fraud Office investigating, and they've dropped the case, and that was in March this year. So if it's in the hands of the police, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a conviction or they're going to prosecute. So when we looked at Castle Trust, the opinion that we got back was that it probably didn't have any money, that it would be insured, but it would probably be in a jurisdiction like BVI, British Virgin Islands, and that the insurance would probably be around 2 to 3 million of cover. Okay, so that's what we got back. But what we also, the opinion was also that if you make a claim against Castle Trust, it would jump into administration. And the solicitor that we approached for this case said that he would gladly take an upfront fee from HSG investors, and he would do the work against Castle Trust, and he would do other work investigating Gary Forrest and the other directors of the company and the other officers of the company. But he knew that it would lead to nothing. And so we've turned away a lot of HSG investors. I see a lot of names on this meeting right now of people that have approached us. I see some people who are clients of ours because they've invested in other scams, and we're able to help them with those. But with HSG, we just could not see a route to recovery against any of the participants. We do know that there is a fraud investigation ongoing into High Street Group. And I've listened to what Andy Holland has had to say, and I agree with a lot of what he is saying. But the difficulty is that no scam or fraud has actually been proven. And the hardest thing for investors sometimes is to wait, is to be patient and see what comes up. Because if you have an SFO investigation into High Street Group, they may well come up with something that enables you to make the sorts of claims that you want to make. If you jump in too early and you go to the FOSS too early without enough evidence, the FOSS will kick it out. And then you have a 6-month period in which to appeal. And after that time, you've lost your opportunity to go against the party that actually may well end up to be, the wrongdoer in this. I'm just going to check my notes while I've been jumping around here. The main reason for me coming on is, actually, Andy summed it up really well. HSG is a complete mess. It's full of bad people from the start of HSG through the administration to all of these recovery room scams that you are getting through your emails. People pretending to be Gary Forrest, people pretending to be from the administrators, people pretending to be from the insolvency service, and every one of them is looking to take money off you. And I said to Andy that I would like to just warn people about a few of them that are going around at the moment, which we feel aren't going to result in recoveries for the investor group. I agree with Andy that ideally, if you could all come together under one umbrella, that would be fantastic, and you stand the best chance of moving forward and getting a recovery. The problem is which person is going to be the leader of that group. And everyone, not everyone, but quite a few people will have their favourites. And we just want to point out some things that have come to light recently. One of the companies that stepped in very early into High Street Group, promising to recover investors' money, was a company called Broadleaf Assist. Now, they came through the Facebook group, the investors' Facebook group. We were at the administrators' meeting, the first administrators' meeting, and Broadleaf Assist was represented by a guy called Bradley Lincoln. And Bradley Lincoln is one of the foremost sellers of bonds, corporate bonds in the UK at that time. He had sold tens of millions of pounds worth of London Capital and Finance, Blackmore bonds, High Street Group. And here he was now, poacher turned gamekeeper, saying that he was going to be able to recover investors' money. We warned people about that, and thankfully they disappeared off the scene. Then in the last in the last 3 or 4 days, we were informed last Friday that there was a Zoom meeting yesterday with 2 companies, one called Delta Management Services and another one called Roccaforte, ROCCAFORTE. Now, some of you may well have been on that Zoom meeting. The guy that the HSG investor that was pushing these guys is a very genuine man who has been taken in by them. Delta Management Services is a Hong Kong company, and it turned out that the owner of that company, who was on the Zoom call, is a UK disqualified director, and he has moved to Hong Kong so that he can avoid effectively being arrested for promising to recover money for investors. Roccaforte is a company with a website that's less than 6 months old, and when we checked the company's house register, it's £27,000 in the red, and it takes in it has an income of about £30,000 a year. It's a one-man band. It hasn't recovered the tens of millions of pounds that it claims to have recovered, and we're just letting people know, if you are tempted by that, they're charging 5% of your investment level, and they want the money sent to a Hong Kong bank account. So if you send it there, you'll never see it again, right? And their website will disappear, and that will be it. So please don't get taken in by that. And actually, Mrs. Jewell mentioned on the chat about a company called Insolvency and Law and Peter Murray. And most of you will know that Insolvency and Law is on the creditors committee for High Street Group. We've had some contact with Insolvency and Law. We know that a solicitor is currently attempting to recover £426,000 from that company on the basis that it's been running an unregulated claims management company. We have an article on our website about Peter Murray and Insolvency and Law. The company has fake awards on its website, and Peter Murray must know that. We're particularly concerned because this company, this guy is very, very smart. And his MO is to invite investors to appoint him as their representative in insolvencies. He then gets on the creditors committee and has influence and can have access to investors' contact details. And this is all free of charge. He is not charging for this. That's what he says. And he claims to be a very experienced guy. Now, what he's doing is he's effectively getting investors' details so that he can start third-party legal actions. And that's unlawful in the UK if you're not regulated to do that. And once people sign up with him, they're tied in. We've had people contact us who have tried to get their money out and they can't. He's an insolvency specialist, or so he claims, and yet he has taken in several £100,000, is what we believe, based on what he's been telling investors about how successful he is. He's taken in hundreds of thousands of pounds for an action against Castle Trust, which he would have known would have gone into administration the moment a claim was made against it. So we're just saying to people, be very careful about who you pay your money to. He was charging 3% plus VAT of an investor's investment, and we've worked with solicitors for many years. We have a panel of UK law firms we work with, and none of them have ever charged 3% plus VAT as an upfront fee. And investors have been tricked into paying that to Peter Murray. So we would say, if you were an investor who has signed up to insolvency and law, you should contact the FCA. We're also, Mark made a comment about insolvency practitioners, and I agree very much with what he said, that there are quite a few bent insolvency practitioners. He recommended Kroll, and we know them, and we would recommend them too, but we also recommend another firm called Quantuma. They're also very good. And we're particularly keen on working with them because they've pursued a case on behalf of one of our clients where there's no money in the pot, and they have actually stumped up the cash to take the guy to court, which is quite rare for an insolvency firm to use its own money. And that's pretty much all I've got to say, really. You know, and I wish if we do find a viable target for High Street Group, we will let people know. But at the moment, we just cannot see a viable recovery action. We do know a lot about APP and the CRM model. We've got cases going right now against banks, but it is very difficult. If you invested before 2019, it's going to be extremely difficult to persuade a bank to refund you your money. You know, so that's it, really, Andy.
Mike, thank you very much indeed. You've done, like Mark, like others, you've done a great job in saying it as you see it in a very direct and straightforward way. Can I please invite everybody to also put their hands together for what Mike has very kindly set through. Mark Bishop has raised his hand, and what we're going to do, we're going to open up the conversation. When I can, I'm going to invite Chris David, Paul Bates, and Annabelle Lachese. Forgive me if I've mispronounced your surname, Annabelle, to chip in with their thoughts as well. After Mark Bishop, we're going to go straight to Paul Bates, who's a very well-known barrister who is qualified both in the US and Canada, and Paul's a great supporter of the work that TTF does. So we'd go Mark Bishop, Paul Bates, Chris David, then Annabelle. Mark, to you. Thank you.
Okay, so firstly, I'd like to endorse what Mike has said. I know the work that Mike does. You know, he is kind of, you know, a street fighter and a kind of, you know, an enterprising individual who knows how, you know, David can beat Goliath, which is really the game that we are in. I've put various things in the chat during this thing. I mean, you guys are in, you know, the biggest of messes imaginable, frankly. You've got insolvency and law actually on your creditors committee. Basically, what that tells us is not just your creditors committee is not on your side, but probably that there is collusion going on between insolvency practitioners and insolvency and law, which basically tells us, you know, what we already suspected by the fact that the insolvency practitioner was appointed by the directors, which is that the insolvency practitioners are conflicted and you need to get them out as soon as possible. Now, the process for doing that, the easiest process is to hold a vote of the creditors. And the way that you hold a vote is you first petition for it. So you write to the current insolvency practitioners, having collated or collected the votes of 10% of the creditors by value. So you get these votes, 10% of them. If you can't get the 10%, then unfortunately you're stuck probably with what you've got. But if you can get the 10%, then there's a way forward. And you say to them, we've now got more than 10% of these votes. We would like to replace the current administrators. We'd like to take the firm into liquidation in the hands of these administrators. So you first have to get lined up a firm of administrators that are willing to act for you. Mike has suggested Quantuma. I've suggested Kroll. What I would actually recommend is that you talk to both. Mike can introduce you, I'm sure, to somebody at Quantuma. I can introduce you to somebody at Kroll. And in fact, I do know, because I asked somebody at Kroll about this case in advance, that somebody to do with you guys had a conversation with them a year, 18 months ago, but it went nowhere. So I can reactivate that conversation for you if you want, just as Mike can initiate a conversation with Quantuma. There are pros and cons by both of them, or to both of them, but you should make your own mind up based on having conversations with them. Hold effectively a beauty parade. But what you don't want is the people that are appointed by the directors, and you certainly don't want somebody that is working with insolvency and law. The idea of people coming to you and asking for upfront payments, the minute that they ask for upfront payments, you know you're dealing with a scammer. Don't deal with them, even if they try and change the terms. As far as I can see, you shouldn't be paying somebody a percentage of recoveries either, because the courses of action that you can pursue fit into two categories. The first are ones that would be pursued by the insolvency practitioners if your firm was in the hands of decent IPs. And those ones are pursued either using the money that's left in the estate, or if all of that money is gone, they can go to solicitors that will work on what's called a contingent fee basis, CFA basis, or ones that work with litigation funding. Given that there are lots of assets involved in this, properties, there probably will be money in the estate, or if not, a competent insolvency practitioner can soon get hold of money from this estate. So they should be able to fund most of their actions themselves. If they're not that, they will be individual claims, either against banks using the contingent reimbursement model, CRM, or they will be against independent financial advisors, SIP providers, SaaS providers, and the like. And if that, an IFA and ISA providers, if that happens, again, you don't need to pay somebody a percentage of the fee. You certainly don't need to pay an upfront fee. All you do is you complain to the FOS, and then you go to the FSCS when they go into default. Personally, I would not do this yet. The reason I would not do it yet is because I think a lot of facts need to come out about what's been going on in this case, and the facts will not come out until you've got insolvency practitioners that you trust in charge of this estate. So my personal view is that job number one, which you probably should have done a couple of years ago, but you must do now, is getting proper insolvency practitioners involved. Oh, sorry, actually, I apologize. That's job number two. Job number one is you need a leadership team. You need a leadership team. And I put it in the chat, when I've helped many people who run action groups over the years, and people in the early days who were running action groups helped me, and I learned from them, and now it's the other way around. And what I've found is that the ones that get results are the ones that have certain characteristics. What you need is a very small leadership team, maybe one person who reports to a small group of people. You don't need democracy. And when you've put together the one person in a small group they report to, you need people who have certain characteristics within the team. You need people who are financially literate. Ideally, you need people who have some knowledge about law. You certainly need people who are good at investigating stuff. I used to be a journalist. So perhaps one of the reasons why I was helpful in the Connaught case was because I had an instinct for finding stuff out. And I could sniff what was misconduct. So you need to find people who are like that. They must be really good at expressing themselves, really good written and spoken English, ability to analyze information. Ideally, they will have time on their hands. They're either retired or they're close to retirement. So I think your job number one, and maybe even think about it now, is who you want to be running the show.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Again, I encouraged you all to listen very attentively to what Mark has to say, and I hope you have been doing that. Mr. Paul Bates, please take a moment to introduce yourself and just share your thoughts about the challenge we have in the UK about us being behind the curve when it comes to class and group actions and that sort of thing. Folks, Paul is a very well respected and very liked member of the TTF on an international basis. Mr. Paul Bates, thank you. If Paul is still with us, he may not be. After that introduction, I think Paul's had to go. He's a busy guy. Okay, we're going to go straight to somebody else who I think wanted to chip in with a comment or two. Mr. Chris David. Do we have Chris David with us? If so, Chris, please take an opportunity to introduce yourself. If Chris isn't here, we'll go to Annabelle.
Chris David is here.
Hi, Chris.
I didn't actually volunteer to speak, but I just would like to say thank you very much to all the contributors tonight. And I do accept that I am an HSG investor, so I am interested in moving forward. And I take great note of what Andy, Mark and Mike have provided us by way of their input this evening. So thank you again.
That's very kind of you, Chris, to be so supportive of the efforts tonight of people trying to shine a bit of a light on these issues. Chris, thank you very much indeed. That's very kind of you. Annabelle, are you with us, Annabelle?
Yes.
Hi,
Can you hear
Annabelle.
me?
Lovely
Hi.
to meet you. Please introduce yourself. Tell us all a little bit about yourself and share whatever it is you'd like to say, Annabelle. Thank you very much.
Yeah, hi, I'm a HSG investor as well, and been fairly involved in following everything that's been going on with HSG. And I've been very attentive to listening to what was being said this evening. It's actually very interesting. So I already knew a lot of the ins and outs already. Regarding the Peter Murray situation, when we were voting for a creditors committee, there were quite a number of us who didn't want Peter Murray to be in there because we just could smell a rat. Problem is that a lot of people are actually pursuing him. And so, of course, that it gave him quite a number of votes. And unfortunately, we're just now seeing a little bit more evidence as to what he's really been up to, and that's unfortunate. I do agree that we're quite, the whole thing is a mess. We're quite disbanded. Some people have invested a huge amount of money. I've invested a certain amount of money, but it's a lot less than what some people have lost, which is difficult. I've been involved in one of the, I'm going to stay vague because it's stuff that's confidential, but I've been involved with one of the SPVs. We're trying to actually get a mediation going in that with one of the constructors who took over one of the SPVs. Very complicated situation again. And it's been an eye-opener because I've actually been able to see for me firsthand that Gary Forrest is not exactly who he says he is. One thing I can actually vouch for is that when having no transparency with administrators, we've wanted, some of us have wanted to change admins. We are aware of the cost, but I'm hearing what's been said this evening. There are ways around that, and it doesn't matter from that perspective how much it's going to cost, because ultimately, if we want to see any kind of evidence of scam or fraud to come through, we probably need to pursue this. And we do need to do it quick and fast, because from what I can see is that Hadrian Real Estate is a no-show. Anybody can look up Companies House and see what's, getting a bit of a superficial idea of what's going on, but it's clearly not going anywhere. And we just kind of feel that they're just waiting for time to wind down. And so then that's it. Oh, well, no more money. We won't make an indemnity for those 7-year and 3-year low note holders. And again, we haven't seen that indemnity at all. So again, and I'm been in contact as well personally with Ella Hay. We've exchanged even right from the beginning, before I knew that she was going to be on the creditors committee. I just want to add that she is one of the persons that I did actually vote for to be on the committee. The reason why there are other people who represent companies, I actually don't really know. I mean, I think they're genuine investors, but they were just bigger and they had companies, they put their names forward. I think a lot of people felt that they were competent to put their names forward to be a representative on the creditor committee. Unfortunately, from what I can see, is that at least a couple of those other company creditor committee members are no longer interested in really pursuing HSG. They're thinking, okay, we've lost our capital, whatever, and we're going to move on. So we don't feel really supported. Elahe has been probably the only one who's actually been trying to push for things to move forward. And so here we are today. Yeah, that's pretty much it from me. But thank you very much anyway for the information that we've received this evening. It's been really helpful. And I do think we do need to have somebody who does lead us, somebody who does have some time, because I'm a working mum. I give some of my time to help, obviously, on this other case that we're on, but you know, I'm there to support. But we do need somebody who has a bit more time on their hands and who can actually and also a group of people. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not into finance, so I'm more of an academic, like Elahe. Maybe research or something, finding out stuff is probably something that we can do. But again, yeah, we're trying to sort of recruit people who, and people need to come forward. Honestly, there's no point in complaining on the WhatsApp chat about stuff. That's just not taking us anywhere. We've actually got to really make a decision here. So yeah, I would actually encourage everyone, if we can go ahead and get this vote. I also live in France, so this is another thing. I actually I don't live in the UK, so there's another it's another factor. So for those of us who are kind of expats, it can be a little bit more daunting, a bit more difficult, but we are sort of we can help whatever way we can. But I think we do need to encourage one another and try and get this vote to change the current credit. I'm not satisfied with the current administration process. We don't get the information that we want, and I reiterate what Elahe has said, is that, you know, we can ask and ask and ask, but there's just no information that's being given. And from the information that we've been given this evening, it's quite clear that obviously, you know, some of these admins, they're just in it for themselves. They're mates with whoever. We don't know who the contacts Gary Forrest has, but I mean, I'm more and more convinced that a lot of us went through introducers. That's the other thing. So of course we can't claim in any way through having been advised by a financial advisor, this, that, and the other. The other thing I want to say as well is that some of us have actually got some experience with investments, that kind of thing. Some people have been, you know, we've been taken in as well. It's not just been, most people are retail investors. There are some genuine, sophisticated and high net worth investors who've been taken in. So it's been very cleverly done. But I think that the whole HSG thing, as we saw earlier, there's so many different companies. It's so messy that it's very difficult to establish where money went. And that's the other thing. We just don't know where all that money's gone. There's no transparency. There's no clarity. We're not getting any response. So yeah.
Annabelle, thank you very much indeed. Mark just paid you a very nice compliment, which I would endorse. Mark Bishop said, I think the group needs a leader with Annabelle's capabilities, but more time to spare, and ideally based in the UK, any candidate. So Mark, I support your indirect compliment of Annabelle. She's clearly a very capable lady. Annabelle, thanks for sharing your thoughts. We're going to jump to Andy Holland, who's put his hand up. And again, thank you so much, Andy, for your time and efforts preparing for all this. We really hope that this free to attend, no cost, no risk event that we've put on for you has been of some use. Certainly the sort of information that Mark and Mike and Andy and Tamara and Ella and Annabelle and others have been sharing will hopefully have meant something to you. Mr. Andy Holland, we'll go back to you and then I'll start bringing the session to a close. Andy, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. I just wanted to say, just make people aware. I know that both Mark and Mike have said it might be prudent to wait until there is enough evidence there. That could be a problem with the Limitation Act, because you need to be bringing claims either from 6 years from the date that you made the investment, or 3 years from from where you made the lot, where you're aware that you could have sustained a loss. So I just wouldn't like any investors to overrun that and then lose their ability to raise a claim. And that's why I've spoken with the Financial Ombudsman Service and have this process of submitting evidence on a few cases and asking them to provide their view on that. And that's the reason why we do things in that way. So I just wanted to raise that.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. I've just noticed a comment in the chat from Juan Carlos. Juan Carlos, would you mind just taking an opportunity to briefly introduce yourself? Just tell everybody what you do. No need to talk about High Street Group, but it would be good for people to know who you are and what you do, if you don't mind coming to the microphone, as it were.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. Please do. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Juan Carlos. I'm a forensic accountant based in the UK. I recently just become a volunteer for the Transparency Task Force. I'm hopefully, getting involved a little bit more as well. So that's why I've been attending this event, and I found it very interesting. At the same time, very, very concerning. I'm not an investor, and I've never been, but it's very concerning to see the number of people and cases, of this type, and the impact that it have. And also, I can hear and share the pain that it goes with the difficulties when it comes to getting documentation, evidence, make a case, and especially when you want to make a case on fraud. On the areas where I work, coming from accountancy practice, is in relation to fraud prevention and detection, fraud investigation, apart from all the areas of as an expert witness, within the forensic accounting field. By the way, I would like to correct something. When I put the message, I meant to say Mark, not Mike.
I thank you very much indeed. Your attention to detail is great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Juan. We've known Juan for quite some time, and I'm very glad that Juan has very kindly volunteered to help TTF. We're always looking for volunteers. If any of you have got an hour or more per month to help in some way, please let us know. This is very much a people power kind of endeavor, and frankly, we need all the help we can get, because frankly, there's so many people being scammed. It's about 40% of all crime is scams and fraud and that kind of thing. It's a huge problem. In general terms, my hope for this evening was to see if there's any unity. And I think it's fair for me to say that the one thing there's unity around is that the situation is a mess. I think that's fair to say. And it's not your fault, folks. You're victims of crooks that seems to me have not been looked after properly by people that owe a duty to look after you. I've just put a little saying in the chat. Those of you that know me well will know that I kind of get from day to day on little sayings. And there's a saying which is, progress begins with realism. I would encourage you to think about the ideas of creating a small, tight leadership team that's completely unconflicted. That's so important. You need to be able to trust people who are going to do the right thing for the right reasons, who've got no ulterior motive or secondary agenda. That's really, really important. And if there is some kind of a commercial agenda, that's absolutely fine, so long as it's transparent, that's really, really important. So I encourage you to kind of talk to each other, use your Facebook group, try to see if a leader or two might come to the surface over a period of time. We'll try to help in whatever we can, bit by bit. And I do hope that you can find a way of moving things forward. Progress begins with realism, and the reality is the situation's a mess. And the reality is that I don't think you've got a good reason to have confidence in the people that are looking out for you. Can I please invite you to put your hands together to thank everybody involved in putting on the session. My own colleagues, Alexandra and Chelsea, aren't here, but they ran tonight's event. Please put your hands together to thank them and also to thank all the speakers from Tamara and Mike and Andy and Ella and Mark again and Juan and everybody that's spoken. Thanks very much indeed. Have a good rest of your evening, folks. Good luck with whatever happens. Good luck. Be suspicious. Work together and try to find a way of actually creating some kind of unity around the idea that leadership right now might make a bit of a difference. And there's probably the perfect person within your community. You just need to go and find him or her to try to make that happen. Thanks very much indeed, folks. Have a good rest of your evening. Good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck.